Morning came soft that spring, the kind that tricks you into thinking winter never happened. The frost had finally left the valley, and the first shoots of green were pushing through the soil. Ilara stood outside with her sleeves rolled, hands in the dirt, humming under her breath. She didn't notice Thomas watching from the porch, coffee steaming in his hand. He wasn't sure when her humming had started, somewhere between the last snow and the first thaw, but now he couldn't imagine the farm without it. She had changed the rhythm of the place. The fields no longer looked like a man's stubborn fight against nature. They looked lived in, cared for. The mule was fatter, the fences straighter, the house cleaner. Funny thing was, he'd never asked her to do any of it. Inside, while Ilara stirred the pot for breakfast, Thomas fixed the squeaky hinge on the door. He didn't have to, but it gave him a reason to stay near her voice. "You're humming again," he said. She smiled faintly. "My mother used to hum when she cooked. Said it made the food softer," he chuckled. "Guess it works for fences too." Even the boards seemed quieter lately. She looked up at him then, just for a second, soft but sure, and he found himself looking away, pretending to check the hinge again. It had been years since anyone's laughter filled this cabin, years since the air had carried anything but grief. Now somehow this girl with the scar on her wrist and the gentle eyes had brought life back with nothing more than her patience. Later that day, while she planted corn, Thomas climbed the roof to patch a leak that had haunted him all winter. He wasn't as steady as he once was. His back complained. His hands slipped more than they used to. Ilara noticed and came running out, dirt still on her knees. "You'll fall," she shouted. He grinned. "Been falling since I was 12. Haven't hit bottom yet." She folded her arms. "That's not comforting." When the plank creaked again, she climbed up beside him without hesitation. "Here," she said, holding the nails. "You hammer, I'll hand." For a while they worked without talking, the wind brushing their faces. From up there, the whole valley stretched out, brown, gold, and just beginning to forgive the long winter. Thomas looked down at her. Sunlight caught the strands of her hair. For a brief, unsettling second, he thought of May, his late wife, and how she used to hand him nails the same way, wordless but present. He forced the thought down, but it stayed, a quiet ache. When the roof was done, they sat on the edge, boots dangling. "Why'd you stay?" he asked suddenly. Could have left after the thaw. She thought for a while before answering. "Because here, no one tells me what I'm worth." He nodded, throat tight. Guess we both needed that. That evening, she found an old box under the bed, wooden with a cracked photograph inside. A woman smiling faintly, hair pinned back, eyes kind. She carried it to the table. "She's beautiful," she said. Thomas froze. "That's May." "She looks strong," Ilara said softly. She was. He looked away, jaw set. "You remind me of her sometimes." "Not how you look. How you don't quit." Ilara felt the words settle somewhere deep. She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. That night, while she stirred stew on the stove, his hand brushed hers by accident. Neither pulled away. The silence between them felt different, gentler, steadier, like something had finally taken root. Outside, the moon rose over the quiet valley. Inside, the cabin glowed with firelight and the faint scent of cornmeal and smoke. For the first time, it felt less like two strangers sharing a roof, and more like two souls finding shelter in the same storm. By the time summer rolled in, the farm looked almost respectable again. The fence held, the crops stood tall, and the roof, by some miracle, no longer leaked. Folks in town noticed, too. You could hear it in their tone when they spoke Thomas's name, that curious mix of disbelief and judgment. "That old widower, the one who bought himself a girl," they'd say. "Guess she's earning her keep." Thomas tried to ignore it, but gossip in a small town travels faster than wind through wheat. He could feel it every time he rode into Dry Hollow for supplies, the sideways looks, the half-hidden smirks. The men by the saloon would nod politely, but their eyes said everything else. The women? They didn't nod at all. Ilara sensed it too. The first time she walked into the general store alone, the room went quiet. Two women near the shelves whispered behind their hands, and the clerk pretended not to see her. By the time she left, her cheeks burned like she'd been slapped. That night, Thomas found her on the porch, staring out at the fields. "They said something?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Doesn't matter. It matters," he said quietly. Her voice trembled when she spoke. They think I'm something I'm not. He wanted to tell her to forget it. That gossip dries up faster than puddles, but he couldn't lie. People out here had long memories for scandal and short ones for truth. Let 'em talk, he said finally. They'll get bored soon enough, but they didn't. A few days later, the preacher stopped by. His boots were clean, his words cleaner. Thomas, he said, standing stiff in the doorway. It's not my place to judge, but you must understand how this looks to others. Thomas said nothing. A young woman, living alone with a widower, the preacher continued. People will assume the worst. Appearances matter. Thomas looked past him to where Alara was hanging laundry in the sun. Her sleeves rolled, her face calm. She's done more honest work here than half the town combined, he said. The preacher sighed. You know I speak only for decency. Then speak it somewhere else, Thomas muttered, and closed the door. That night, neither of them said much at supper. The air felt heavier than heat. Alara picked at her food, eyes down. You shouldn't have done that, she said finally. Done what? Spoken to him like that. Now it'll only get worse. He leaned back, tired. Maybe, but I'm done pretending we owe anyone an explanation. She set her fork down. You can ignore them. I can't. The hurt in her voice hit him harder than any insult. He wanted to tell her she was safe, that he'd stand between her and every cruel word. But the truth was, he couldn't stop people's tongues. Days passed, and the silence between them grew wider. She stopped humming. He stopped asking why. Work filled the space that used to be peace. The fields looked fine, but the cabin felt hollow again. One evening after the sun dropped behind the ridge, Alara packed her small bag. Thomas came in from the barn just in time to see her tying the last knot. Going somewhere? He asked, though he already knew. She kept her eyes on the bag. If I leave, maybe they'll stop talking. He swallowed hard. If you leave, what we built dies too. Her hands trembled as she tied the strap. Maybe it was never meant to last. For a moment he thought to reach out, to say something that would make her stay. But the words wouldn't come. They just stood there, two people who'd finally found peace, now watching it slip through their fingers. When she stepped out into the rain, he didn't follow. He stood by the door, listening to her footsteps fade into the night. The storm rolled in soon after, wind shaking the shutters. The fire burned low, untouched stew growing cold on the table. And as the thunder rumbled over the valley, Thomas sat in the dark and wondered how something so decent, so fragile, could turn to dust so quietly. The air was thick with dust and shame that morning. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the square. Next lot, 20 years old, strong enough for housework. And Thomas Keene felt his stomach twist. He hadn't meant to come here. He'd told himself he was only passing through Dry Hollow for mule feed, not to witness another soul's ruin. Yet here he was, clutching a single silver coin in his calloused hand, the last of his harvest money, watching a frightened girl stand on a crate like she'd already been buried. He'd seen eyes like hers before, back when his wife May still lived. Eyes that had stopped expecting kindness, eyes that had learned to hide behind obedience. He tried to look away, but the sound of a man laughing nearby burned him worse than sun on bare skin. Ain't worth $50, the man said. Too skinny to last a winter. The crowd chuckled. The girl didn't move. Thomas didn't think. He stepped forward, lifted the coin, and the laughter died. $1 silver, he said. The auctioneer blinked, then slammed his gavel. Sold. That was it. No applause, no mercy. Just dust rising, and whispers chasing him as he walked toward her. Old fool, someone muttered. Can't feed himself now buying a girl. She looked at him, just once, quick as lightning. Then her gaze dropped to the dirt again. He handed her the blanket that hung over his shoulder. You'll ride in the wagon, he said. His voice came out rough even to his own ears. Ain't far. They rode in silence for miles, the road stretching like a scar across the valley. The wind hissed through the wagon slats. Every few minutes, Thomas glanced back. She hadn't touched the bread he'd left beside her. By the time they reached the farm, dusk had smeared the sky into copper. The place was small, a one-room cabin, half a roof of patched tin, two stubborn fields that hadn't seen real rain since last spring. Ain't much, he said quietly. But it's safe. She stepped down slowly, eyes scanning the emptiness. You bought me to work? She asked. Her voice was softer than he expected. Thomas stopped, one hand on the door. Bought you to keep the wolves off, he said. Rest's up to you. Inside, the fire pit glowed faintly. He set out an extra plate, though there wasn't enough stew for two. She watched him, waiting for something, a command, a threat, maybe worse. But all he said was, "Eat while it's hot." Then he walked out, closing the door behind him. He slept on the porch that night, coat for a blanket, stars for a ceiling. Somewhere inside, she shifted in the bed, the one May had died in. He wondered what the town would say tomorrow. Probably that he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had, but he'd lost everything else already. Losing his reputation didn't matter much. At dawn, he woke to the smell of coffee. Not his, hers. She'd found the tin he kept hidden behind the stove. When he stepped in, she looked startled but didn't speak. "Didn't have to," he said. "I know," she whispered. "But I wanted to." Thomas nodded, unsure what to do with the warmth rising in his chest. He poured a cup and sat opposite her, the silence easier than he'd ever known. That morning the sun rose slow over the dry fields. The farm was still poor, the roof still leaking, and they were two strangers bound by a coin. Yet something invisible had shifted. He didn't know what to call it. Maybe it was mercy, maybe madness. But as she hummed softly over her cup, Thomas realized it was the first sound in years that didn't make his heart ache. He didn't know it yet. But that one small act, one coin, one choice, had already started a miracle. By the second week, Alara had learned that silence had its own language. Thomas spoke little, but every movement of his hands, steady, careful, never rushed, said more than words could. When he poured water from the tin pail, when he brushed dust from the mule's coat, when he left half his supper untouched so she'd eat a little more. You could read the man's heart in those small things if you paid attention. And she did. The cabin creaked under the cold that morning. Frost had formed on the window edges, drawing white lace over the glass. Alara woke to the sound of chopping outside, the rhythm sharp and patient. She pulled on her worn shawl and stepped to the door. Thomas stood by the stump, hat low over his brow, each swing clean and certain. He didn't look up when she came out, just said, "Fire's low." "We'll need plenty." She tried to smile. "I can help." He shook his head. "You'll freeze out here." Still, she stayed, gathering the split logs into a basket. Her fingers went numb, but it felt good, honest, to work beside him. No shouting, no cruelty, no orders barked like chains. Just breath, wood, and the sound of effort shared between two people who didn't yet know what to call each other. When she carried the basket inside, the stove hissed as she fed the flame. The smell of pine smoke filled the room. Thomas came in later, boots heavy with frost. "You burn your hand?" he asked. She glanced at the red mark across her palm and hid it behind her skirt. "It's nothing," she said. He frowned, set down his gloves, and took her wrist gently. "Doesn't look like nothing." His touch was rough but careful, the way you'd handle something that mattered. He wrapped a strip of clean cloth around it, tied the knot with slow fingers. Neither spoke for a while. The silence wasn't awkward, it was almost kind. That evening, rain began tapping on the roof, soft at first, then heavier, until the wind joined in like a restless spirit. Thomas checked the shutters, muttering about the creek rising. Alara lit the lamp and watched him move around the cabin. "You ever had help before?" she asked suddenly. He paused, one hand on the window frame. "Had a wife once. May. She helped more than I deserved." Alara nodded. "She's gone?" He gave a small nod, eyes fixed on the dark outside. 5 years, the storm deepened. They worked together to bring the tools in, their clothes soaked, boots sinking in mud. The wagon creaked in the wind, the mule brayed nervously. "Come on," Thomas said, grabbing the rope to tie the gate. "We'll lose the fence if this keeps up." Alara followed, hair plastered to her face, rain mixing with tears she didn't even know she was shedding. They wrestled the gate shut and stumbled back inside, drenched and shaking. Inside, she built the fire while Thomas hung their coats by the door. The warmth crawled back slowly, inch by inch. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, his hand trembling just a little from cold. "Ain't much," he said. "It's enough," she replied. For the first time, she smiled, really smiled, and he caught himself staring longer than he should. Something about it tugged at the place he'd kept closed for too long. As the storm thundered outside, they ate in silence. Between the gusts, you could hear the faint ticking of the lantern, the crackle of wet wood drying. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, like she was confessing to the dark. "You didn't have to buy me," she said. Thomas set his spoon down. "Didn't buy you. Saved what was left." Her eyes met his, steady now. "And what if there's nothing left to save?" He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight catching the edges of his tired face. "Then we build something new." Outside, the storm began to fade. The roof still dripped, the wind still groaned, but inside that small, battered cabin, something shifted. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the start of trust, born quietly, the way all good things begin out here. By the time autumn reached the valley, the air had turned dry and tired. Dust clung to everything, the road, the porch, even the memory of Alara. Thomas moved through the days like a man counting steps to nowhere. The fields had grown quiet again. No humming, no laughter, just the sound of his own breath and the mule's hooves dragging through the dirt. He told himself she'd gone where life might be easier, somewhere with fewer eyes and softer voices. But when he came in at night, the empty chair by the fire mocked him more than any gossip ever could. He'd built this farm to keep something alive. Now it only kept him company. Then came the sickness. It crept through Dry Hollow like a slow wind. First the children, then the old. Thomas heard about it when he rode into town with his last sacks of grain. The doctor was gone, the preacher ill, and people were starving. He didn't ask what to do. He just loaded the wagon and started delivering what little he had left. For days he carried grain and water from house to house, burning with fever himself by the end of it. No one thanked him. No one had the strength. He didn't care. The work gave him something to stand on, even if his legs trembled. On the 5th day, he collapsed outside the old mill. When he opened his eyes again, the world was dim, and someone was wiping his forehead with a damp cloth. "Alara?" he whispered. She didn't answer, just smiled the way dawn does, quiet, certain, like she'd been there all along. "Found you half dead," she said softly. "Didn't seem right, you dying before me." He tried to speak, but she hushed him, pressing the cloth to his brow. Her hands were steady now, her voice stronger than he remembered. She'd come back different. Not the frightened girl from the auction, but a woman who had faced the world and come home with courage still intact. "You shouldn't have come back," he murmured. "Maybe not," she said. "But someone had to take care of the fool giving away his last grain." He wanted to laugh, but it came out a cough. "Wasn't doing it for thanks." "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." She nursed him for days, through fever and shivering nights. When he drifted in and out of sleep, he could hear her talking softly, telling stories of the people she'd helped on her way back, of strangers who had become family, of how the town had changed once sickness made everyone equal for a while. When he was strong enough to walk again, she helped him outside. The fields were pale gold, the horizon soft with morning haze. "You kept the place alive," she said. He shook his head. "You did. Just took a while to realize it. By winter, the sickness had passed." The town came back in pieces, slower, quieter, humbled. People who once whispered now came to their door for help, and neither Thomas nor Alara turned them away. They never spoke about the past, or about what had been said or what had been lost. Some things didn't need words. On a clear morning, Thomas stood by the porch railing, looking out at the land reborn under the sun. Alara brought him coffee, her hands steady, her hair tied back in the same old ribbon she'd worn that first day. "Never thought I'd see the valley look this alive again," he said. "It's not the valley," she replied. "It's the people." He smiled, slow and quiet. "Guess that includes us then." The breeze carried the scent of wheat and smoke. Children's laughter drifted from the nearby road, orphans she'd taken in, helping them the way he once helped her. As the day broke full, light poured across the porch, spilling through the open windows. Thomas felt the warmth touch his face, and for the first time in years, it didn't ache. He turned to her. "You're home now," he said simply. And she smiled, not like someone who'd been saved, but like someone who'd finally come where she was always meant to be.